in collaboration with our university. We are happy to have with us today Jared Quek, who is the member of Sri Aurobindo Society Singapore branch and who has practiced integral yoga uh, for the last 20 years. He holds also 2 postgraduate degrees from the University of Oxford, specializing in Indian philosophy, Christian theology, and business administration. He works in the education sector and invests in technology companies. His thesis, by the way, was on integral monism. That's I want to mention from my side. The comparative study of Kashmiri Shaivism and Sri Aurobindo's integral philosophy. He was comparing also the monism of Advaita and Kashmiri Shaivism, as well as cosmogenesis of and the realistic idealism of Kashmiri Shaivism and that of Sri Aurobindo. Today, Jared will focus on the stage of mental subjectivism, as it is described by Sri Aurobindo in The Human Cycle, pointing out that despite the apparent darkness and chaos, there is every sign that the world is entering into this new and wonderful era of spiritual age. Sharing some thoughts on the myth of Atlantis and its cardinal importance to the coming age of mental subjectivism, briefly contrasting this vision of the future with that offered by Western transhumanists who believe in using human augmentation technologies to alter society and its destiny. So I welcome you, Jared. Please take a lead and make your presentation. After his presentation, which will take some time, longer than expected because it's quite deep and profound, it may take something like 40, 45 minutes. We will have a question and answer session. Please, Jared.
Okay.
You can
So
project.
Vladimir, you can, yeah, sure. You can hear me clearly, right?
Yes.
Just checking. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to start the slideshow. Vladimir, thanks again for the invitation and good evening from Singapore. Everyone's attending. So Vladimir, you can see the slides clearly?
Yes, yes. Wonderful.
Okay. My slide projection is slightly blocked by the Zoom, the people here, but you see the slides only, right?
Right.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Okay, so good evening, everyone. So today, what I'm talking about really is inspired by Sri Aurobindo's The Human Cycle, a very beautiful book that really talks about social evolution, as we shall talk about. I mean, I think most of us know a lot more about individual evolution, individual yoga in a sense. But actually, Sri Aurobindo is extremely different, or should provide some really original insights on how society as a whole must change in order to accommodate the supramental manifestation. So if we look at the conventional views of the future by science fiction, by politicians, by business people, we're basically looking at a highly technological, the advanced society, a world of autonomous cars, drones, robots, AI, genetic engineered organisms, starships. I mean, we all know all the science fiction. In fact, I am a Star Trek fan to some extent. So I'm quite cognizant of how does the world generally view the future? It's a highly technological, physically advanced world. And of course, Vladimir was briefly mentioning the transhumanist philosopher. One of the, like Nick Bostrom from Oxford's Future of Humanity Institute, they believe that we should use human technology to change the human body. And that is really the next step forward. To merge with the machine is really the next step forward. So that is a very widespread view and very powerful and predominant, supported by indirectly or directly by a lot of people. But Sri Aurobindo actually predicts a very different trajectory. I'm assuming almost everyone here is already familiar with the basics, at least, if not a lot more, in fact, of Sri Aurobindo's philosophy. So certain things I will just be browsing over. So Sri Aurobindo actually predicts a very different trajectory, I think, like what most of us already know. Instead of this linear projection of machines now to more machines later, more advanced machines later, he really projects something that is more like a curve, not a linear projection, but extraordinary bending of the curve that will take humanity to unforeseen and unforeseeable, actually, horizons. Very briefly, as I say, we are talking in the family, so to speak. Most of us know what we're talking about already. He predicts the holistic transformation of the human organism by the spirit, by the divine spirit, leading to the creation of a renewed humanity, which will sort of coexist with a new superhuman species, what we call the supramental being. So this will in turn culminate in the destruction of evil and a complete reign of God in individuals, in society, in the world. As I mentioned earlier, really is the social thought in which Sri Aurobindo really original. He is original in many, many ways. But in terms of portraying a kind of spiritualized community, I think it's really without compare. And of course, this is well known, but I think perhaps what is somewhat less well known is that actually Sri Aurobindo actually set up a rather clear roadmap on the attainment of this social change. And that is actually quite extraordinary, because if we look carefully at his works, I wish to venture the point that we are actually looking at great changes in the next few decades. We are not looking at something far away. In fact, I think we can make a very strong case that Sri Aurobindo is predicting something that will take place, that's already taking place, and will bear very significant fruit in the next few decades. So that is really what I am arguing for, and sharing his books from that angle in this presentation before we do the questions and answers. So to fully understand his stages, we need to look at Sri Aurobindo's psychology, so to speak. So Sri Aurobindo briefly believed in that man is divided into, in an external level, into three levels: the mind, the vital, and the physical. The vital refers to the life force, the mind to, at the outer level, the intelligence. The physical, of course, refers to the body. And then we have this much vaster being called the subliminal, which there are lots of things which many of you are familiar with, and I'm not going into. But this is actually a much vaster province of our being. And on top of that is the so-called central being, the Jivatman, which is the spark of the divine, so to speak, which is connected to our soul here. But what is important to note is the differentiation, the three layers here, because this is actually central to his social thought as well. As within, so without, as above, so below, right? The old Hermetic formula. So for Sri Aurobindo, it's the same. As within, so without. Whatever is in the human nature is mapped onto the social nature. And as we evolve individually, so shall we evolve socially. So really, he talks about three stages, so to speak. I'm oversimplifying somewhat, but this is to give the large schema. So he says that as we approach the spiritual age, we will shift from rationalistic, materialistic focus. That means we focus on all is matter and is mechanistic, Newton's laws of motion apply to everything, and so on and so forth. And that is this strong materialistic focus. We will start from there, from matter, from body, but we'll move on a social level, collectively, to start to focus more subjectively. We look inwards more as a society. I need to emphasize that, not as individuals, on the vital force, the life force, as the ultimate reality. So first we think maybe we are a bunch of atoms, that basically we can explain everything by physical laws, by mechanistic laws even, not even the more subtle quantum kind of phenomenal, but something mechanistic. But later on we move on, society, he predicts, will move on. In fact, when he writes, as I shall say later, he already believes they are deep into it, into some kind of vital subjectivism. That means we believe that the life force itself is the ultimate, the Brahman, the ultimate. And based on that, we should view the whole of society, we should view the whole of the universe, and we should view ourselves as manifestation of life force. But he believes that after that, we'll move on to mental subjectivism, where we believe that the mind is the ultimate. The mind is the true reality. Mind, however defined, of course. And that will be the final stage before we move on to the spiritual age, so to speak. So this is the threefold movement that Sri Aurobindo predicts. Now I'll focus on the paragraph from, I think I have to, okay. I'm moving out because the text is blocked by the picture. Vladimir, could I just check, can you still see the slides?
Yeah, we see
them.
the slides. The point that you don't see the slides, how can you read then? Why don't you see the slides? I don't understand. We all see it. It's projected.
No. So when the slideshow is shown, part of my words be blocked by the. Oh, I found a way. Okay.
You can move your picture away also. You can make it smaller.
Yeah, I have just done that. Okay, so it's just my Zoom knowledge. Okay, so let me just restart. From current slide. Okay, so Vladimir can still see the slide, right? Everything is fine. Okay, so I will just read this. Sri Aurobindo's writing is mantric and there's a deep truth to it. So, however, because of time constraint, what I could do is only to read it once and briefly talk about it. The slides and the original article in which I base all this on, because I wrote an article in 2019 about this. In fact, this presentation is only the sort of a summary of the first part. So I will just read through this text and we'll leave you all to think about it and read it again, hopefully, maybe after this webinar. The human intellect in modern times has been first drawn to exhaust the possibilities of materialism by immense dealing with life and the world upon the basis of matter as a sole reality, matter as the eternal, matter as the Brahman, Anam Brahma. Afterwards, it had begun to turn towards the conception of existence as a large pulsation of a great evolving life, the creator of matter, which would have enabled it to deal with our existence on the basis of life as original reality, life as the great eternal, Brahma. And already it has in germ, in preparation, a third conception, the discovery of a great self-expressing and self-finding inner mind other than our surface mentality as a master power of existence. And that should lead towards a rich attempt to deal with our possibilities and our ways of living on the basis of mind as the original reality, the great eternal, Mano Brahma. So this is from Human Cycle 253-4. Later on, when you see the page number, this will be from the Human Cycle alone, because I will not be citing the work anymore. So I think we can see from the 3 paragraphs that Sri Aurobindo really predicts 3 stages, as you can see, where we focus on different layers of our being as the ultimate reality. Again, I emphasize this is about how society or a society as a whole view reality. It's not about one individual. It's collectively how we change our points of view as we evolved. Now, of course, you may say, if this is something really, really far away, then in a certain sense, it is good to know, but it's not that relevant. But as I argued at the start, this is not something far, far away. In fact, even though despite the darkness of what we see, all the phenomena, I'm sure you can recognize what's going on in many of these pictures. It seems like we are stuck in darkness, in chaos. It does not seem like we are going anywhere, right? I mean, but the fact is, actually, we can make a very strong case from the writings of Sri Aurobindo. He actually indicates quite clearly that we are, in fact, in the later part of the 3rd stage. We are, in fact, in the later part of the 3rd stage. We are not even in the 1st stage or the 2nd even. We are, in fact, deep into the 3rd stage already. The 1st stage, I shall argue, from his writings, in fact, is quite clear. He refers to it to be the 19th century, the early 20th century. Vital subjectivism is a stage which stretches from the late 19th to the end of World War II. And actually, we can argue, even though he does not state that directly, from World War II onwards, we are actually already entered into the foundational stage of the mental subjectivism. And now we may be reaching the end of the first stage. This may seem surprising, but I don't think for us who are so-called in the circle, we know about the supramental descent, we believe in the supramental descent in 1956. Clearly, it is perfectly rational to believe in a great acceleration. And Sri Aurobindo also predict that this fast movement from one stage to another is also a sign that the time has come. And we do know the time has come. So in itself, it's not too surprising. But if you look at his works, again, this is a quick reading of his work, not the deep study that we should usually bring to this. You can see here that after the material formula, which governed the greater part of the 19th century, had burdened man with the heaviest servitude to the machinery of the outer material life, the first attempt to break through, to get to the living reality in things and away from the mechanical life, idea of life and living in society, landed us in that surface vitalism, which had already begun to govern thought before the two formulas inextricably locked it together, lit up and flung themselves on the lurid pyre of the World War. This World War here, given the time of writing, actually refers to the First World War. So you already can see that the rationalistic material formula is really something of the 19th century. And by the time he was writing in the early 20th century, he already said they are already into the vital subjectivist age. And in fact, even at that point, he was predicting that vitalism will come to disaster because it's incomplete. And it came to disaster, of course, in the developments of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, where the worship of power and the reign of the Asura reached its climax. This titanism ended exactly as Sri Aurobindo has predicted, in something violent, huge, colossal, for doom in its very nature, to excess and ruin, because light is not in it, nor the soul's truth, nor the sanction of the gods and their calm, eternal will and knowledge. In this great excess, much of the world was brought to ruin. But at the same time, it was effectively, I would think, the end of vital subjectivism. Sri Aurobindo did right in the human cycle that vital subjectivism need not have been disastrous, but the problem was that the kind of vital subjectivism that took hold in the world was a very incomplete, distorted kind of vital subjectivism, and therein lies the problem. In theory, at least, there was a possibility of a vital subjectivism that was great, because after all, prana, I mean, the life force is too a divine force. There's nothing evil in itself intrinsically, but it didn't work out that way. In any event, more importantly for our age, is that something really remarkable happened after World War II. First of all, vitalistic thought, like Elan Vital in the life force in biology and all that stuff, and the will to power and all those things in politics that gave rise in a distorted form to Nazism, all fell out of fashion. They're out of fashion totally. In biologists, you will not find a biologist today, a serious biologist anyway, that will argue for the life force flowing through your body and that kind of thing. You still get it in Ayurveda, or you get it in Qigong in China, but you don't get it in conventional medicine, Western medicine anyway. And World War II marked the invention, as we shall see, rather momentous consequence of the first electronic computers. The late 1940s, I think it's 48 if I remember correctly, witnessed the publication of Shannon's seminal paper on information theory. Information theory and then the electronic infrastructure made possible the infrastructure of our information age, wireless communications, satellite communications, and of course, the internet. So the information age really began around the mid-20th century. I do not think it's a coincidence it began after the fall of vital subjectivism. In fact, if we look closely in the light of Sri Aurobindo, in the beginning of mental subjectivism, we should expect the outer mind to be developed first, which means this mind, I mean the thinking mind, dynamic mind, the external or physical mind, this should be developed first. And actually, if we look objectively at what has happened over the last 70 years, we see this happening exactly. We already entered, it seems, into a collective attempt to deal with the possibilities and our ways of living on the basis of mind as the original reality. we first see the greater and greater development of the outer mind and externalized reason. We see it first in the mechanical manifestations of this mind. The supercomputer being the archetype, the internet, artificial intelligence, which has really taken off in the last 5 to 7 years because of advancement in hardware. Actually, the software was, I mean, the algorithms were available long before, like deep learning was there for a really long time, but the hardware took off in the last about 5 to 7 years. And so the exponential development of this mechanical manifestation of this mind is very clear and undeniable. And certain countries, like the United States, has been really leading in this great manifestation. There's also been a mass democratization of education and mental training. Throughout even the poorest countries, I mean, China was a very poor country at the start of the mid-20th century, but there was a vast, India as well, but there was a vast push for education across most of the countries of the world. Literacy rate, numeracy, all increased throughout the whole world. Is this really an accident? And most importantly, I would say, we begin to understand the universe in a computational way. Now, what does that mean? To understand that, we have to understand, of course, and I think many of us who work in this field will know that computer simulations have become more and more powerful. For instance, we can use multi-scale modeling to model systems of different levels, from all these molecular networks, the cellular networks, the organic networks, to create the individual, and this in turn can be modeled as a social network. Of course, to run such a simulation is heinously, computationally very expensive, but we are getting to that point where we can do a lot of such things. Computer simulations have become more and more powerful. And this is one of the reasons, not the only, I'm simplifying the issue quite a bit, that a lot of high-profile physicists and philosophers really have started seriously considering whether reality is really a computer simulation. Like, this is an MIT scientist who wrote this book called The Simulation Hypothesis. Are we all like video games characters living in the matrix? However, to ask this question is really to ask the same question as this, if you really think about it. Whether it's because if you think that we live in a computer simulation, then obviously the generator of reality is a computer. It's a physical, or it's a mind, it's a cosmic mind of some kind. Therefore, it really goes back to asking, these modern physicists and philosophers are asking the same question. They're going back to a version of idealism, which is, taking mind as the original reality. And this is not something that is woolly, or is something that's increasingly mainstream. And that again is along the lines of what Sri Aurobindo has predicted. Because what he predicted is, if we go back a bit, that we will see mind as the original reality. Mind as the original reality. And that's exactly what is happening now, as the computational view of the universe and the computational paradigm take over completely from the vitalistic paradigm. And we see it in every field. Biology, we have bioinformatics. We see it in economics, where we liken the market, the stock market, to a supercomputer. We see it in the way we think about education. We see it in psychology, where we liken the human mind and consciousness to a computer. The computational metaphor has become so powerful. It has been dominating so many different fields of philosophy, science, and politics, economics. And isn't that exactly what Sri Aurobindo has predicted, that we are going increasingly to see mind as the original reality? So I leave you with this quite interesting thought. And then linking back, of course, to this year, I read a kind of joke saying that this year, it seems like the newspaper headlines have been taken over by Netflix script writers. Every single week, especially in the United States, you see interesting things happening. And so this is truly a very interesting year. So, but of course, besides the interesting things that have been happening, we would like to see it in the light of Sri Aurobindo. So what could be the significance of this? If really we are deep into the foundation of mental subjectivism, what is the significance of 2020 really? I'm not saying this is the only significance. I believe this is a hinge year for many, many reasons. But for the purpose of this talk, I would say these 4 trends will be extremely important. We have seen the acceleration of online interactions, the one we are having right now. We have seen the vast explosion of e-commerce in America, Europe, China, across the world. Digital payments have taken off a lot more. I'm not saying it started to take off, but this is an exponential explosion. AI and automation have been growing a lot for the last 5 to 10 years, AI in particular. But this year, really, it's also augmented. And this is a big point, but I will only briefly talk about it. This year, due to international tensions and various other reasons, China has been forced to sort of get smarter faster. So I assume that it will probably lead to the faster development of things like computer chips, quantum, this is not only quantum technology, digital currencies. In the last two, China is already to a great extent leading. So we do not know how it developed, but the United States clearly has been the leader in terms of the development of the information age. That's without a doubt. But perhaps that the US has sort of awakened this sleeping giant here. And if you really, I can only go very briefly. If you really look at the history of Chinese technical prowess, it's actually quite remarkable that China has been ahead of, say, Europe by, on average, about 1,000 years for many, many areas of technology, anything from cast iron, which is actually very significant for making productive agricultural tools, to gunpowder, movable type, and to toilet paper and toothbrush, or whatever it might be. So China has been a very, very inventive nation historically. Viewed from the eyes of Sri Aurobindo, of course, we do not see these things as being merely adventitious. It's something in the national soul. And for 2020 probably marks a further awakening of this Chinese technical prowess for whatever consequence it might have. Just a brief introduction, for instance, if you look at just this one industry that you find in China, you can see that this is a very, very old industry. Jade carving has been in China since the Stone Age, actually, 3,500 BC. So that's 5,500 years ago. But more importantly, China never stayed static. You will see that China actually progressed in jade carving for at least 5 different generations of them for 5,000 years. Even till today, the same great jade artists are still carving, but they're using completely different tools from their ancestors, and they have been still improving. So I believe that this awakening of Chinese technical prowess, or the acceleration, will have pretty momentous consequence for the world, although it's not something, the consequence I could fully outline or spell out or fully understand really at this stage. But perhaps it has something to do with the acceleration of the information age as well. So really what I think maybe the true meaning of the information age in the eyes of Sri Aurobindo is that it does construct the physical foundation and nervous system for an age of mind. It creates this body, this planetary mind to do that. And it brings our foundational external mental powers to their fullest development. And I will argue quite strongly that in the last 70 years, it in fact has already been accomplished to a very great extent. And 2020 is the year of the pivot, the final push, I would say. So what we see is something quite extraordinary that has happened in the last 70 years. Even the humblest members of society, a farmer in India, someone stuck in the hills of Yunnan in China, or some very poor person in Africa with a mobile phone can access much information and therefore power at extraordinary speeds. That African peasant we are talking about is probably more powerful than some kings of long ago because of that. And in a reversal of the parable of Tower of Babel, which I think more of us are familiar with, humanity could now work, trade, and collaborate with much greater ease. We have come together much more. And increasingly, interconnected network of AI have been developed with ever-growing speed and power. Of course, Google is one of the archetypal example. I expect Google to become one of our world's first planetary AI, actually, given the amount of data it's amassing and all those things. So these are extraordinary things. Maybe on its worldwide scale, it's probably something never seen before in the history of humanity, and something that has empowered humanity to a huge extent. Yet, the very power it has given us is juxtaposed with a very frustrating reality that actually our fundamental problems remains quite unsolved. So, and I believe that in the light of Sri Aurobindo, because he believes in this nature of how all problems are about creating harmony between opposites, right? And so I believe that this is actually a clear sign that humanity is ready to move on to the next arc of our development. And that to me is something quite hopeful and inspiring, that despite our huge problems, what the progress we have made in this last 70 years show that actually we are about to break through. I don't think it's something actually very far away, especially after this year. And actually, Sri Aurobindo already predicted this in his prescient words. He says, I mean, before I talk about this, he basically says that the first stage of mental subjectivism is actually marked by the explosion of rationality, or the vast expansion of rationality. But he says already it's not going to solve the fundamental problems. And that's exactly, I think, the stage we are in right now. So I'll just read this three. This first stage of mental subjectivism is foreshadowed in an increasing tendency to rationalize entirely man and his life, to govern individual and social existence by an ordered scientific plan based upon his discovery of his own and of life's realities. This attempt is bound to fail because reason and rationality are not the whole of man or of life. Reason is only an intermediate interpreter, not the original knower, creator, and master of our being of cosmic existence. It can besides only mechanize life in a more intelligent way than in the past. To do that seems to be all that the modern intellectual leaders of the race can discover as the solution of the heavy problem with which we are impaled. Strong words. Heavy problem with which we are impaled. So in essence, he has already sort of foreseen this failure, that despite 70 years where we push our reason and our outer mind to the planetary level, not the supercomputers of today can do things that are completely undreamt of by those terrible computers, room-sized thingies that existed in the 1940s. The smartphone we hold in our hands can do more, infinitely more than those early computers. Not to mention the most powerful computers, not to mention the entire internet. We have so much rational power, so much data at our command. And yet, exactly like what he said, we are still impaled with the heavy problem of our human existence, actually. So what do I predict will come after 2020, in the light of Sri Aurobindo and given this situation? So I guess it's a mix of both good news, very good news, and some very bad news. First, I think we will reach the climax, and then we'll reach the decadence of the information age. 2020 actually gives a faster push, the push on Chinese tech, the digital commerce, and so on and so forth. We will see the development of ever greater artificial intelligence, robotics. We will see greater interconnectivity, 5G, 6G, 7G, don't know which level. We will see e-commerce, our outward mental power, education, and so on and so forth will expand. But we will also see ever greater social instability and inequality. I think that's actually quite obvious, especially AI and automation. They're going to take away a lot of jobs. There have been differing levels of predictions, but easily you can expect 20 to 30 to 40% of jobs being lost to automation alone. And that will mean greater inequality. And we are leaving aside this COVID recession that we are talking about. And we will also face ever more problems that we simply cannot solve because of international rivalry, because of our human consciousness and ignorance, because of our selfishness. Climate change, with all our power, we still cannot really properly. We have pandemics, wars, psychological disorders. So while we are getting more and more powerful, more and more information, at the same time, I believe we will be brought to a moment of greater and greater crisis, at least till we break through. So this is what I think will likely happen post-2020 in the next decade. And the first signs of it is actually, this year is almost like a microcosm of the future. It's already a lot of things is already working itself out. So of course, then the important question is, given this mix of good and bad news, through the pressure of the darkness, and most importantly, the secret working of the supermind, what will emerge? Again, Sri Aurobindo actually has an answer for that already in the human cycle. It seems as if somehow he has already foreseen this really nice and long roadmap all the way to the spiritual age. he actually predicts that we will breach the barrier between the outer being and the subliminal being. He does not predict that on an individual level. There have been plenty of people, relatively speaking, who has did that before on the individual level. But he's saying that we will do something quite much rarer, that is on the social level. In certain communities, there will be a mass breaking of this barrier between the subliminal, which is our larger mind, life, and body, and the external being. He believed that on the collective level, our surface mentality and our inner being, our inner mind, life, and bodies will be unified. That means many people in certain given communities will do that. And certain societies will give first place to the development of one's inner being, not first place to economic development or technological development or even higher things like education or morality, but the development of one's inner being will start taking first place. And of course, this will naturally take place in pioneering communities. All of us, of course, recognize the Matrimandir here. So we are talking about certain collectives and certain countries maybe that will push ahead in this direction faster than others. And that is essentially what he predicts, that through, and I think 2020 has given a sort of impetus to this breaking of the barrier through the crisis, through the pushing the final stage of the physical information infrastructure at least. So I'm now going to read the part in Sri Aurobindo where he sort of predicts this. But it is conceivable that this tendency to mechanize life may hereafter rise to the higher idea of man as a mental being, the soul in man that must develop itself individually and collectively in the life and body through the play of an ever-expanding mental existence, through the greatening of his mental and psychic being and the discovery, bringing forward an organization of subliminal nature and its forces, and the utilization of a larger mind and a larger life waiting for discovery within us. So I'm just getting to get the time. Okay, so what he really predicts is a profound change in certain communities of the world. And he writes beautiful things about it. Yes? Sorry? Oh, nothing. Okay, so he writes beautiful things about it. Of course, before this beautiful stage, I believe we must still pass through this rather unfortunate coexistence of light and darkness, but he does predict a breakthrough. I cannot tell you, of course, how far you will be. My own sense is that it's not as far away as we may think, because 2020 has given a really big push in this direction. Things may be happening that we do not know of that lead to a much faster consummation than what we may expect. And that, I guess, is the hope. So what he really talks about is this beautiful era. It's not the spiritual age yet, it's the final stage in a way. An era will give a new tone and atmosphere, a loftier spirit, a wider horizons, a greater aim to the whole of society. And he predicts great things in science, in art, and in international relations and social interactions. Sri Aurobindo says that the mental subjectivist communities might easily develop a science which will bring the powers of the physical world into real and not a contingent and mechanical subjection, and open perhaps the doors of other worlds. In other words, he's talking about magic or occultism or whatever you may choose to call it, but a technology and a science that understand and can work with nature directly without the need for a lot of cumbersome machinery like what we have today. It might develop an achievement of art and beauty, which will make the greatness of the past a comparatively little thing, that even the Leonardo da Vinci of the past will be thrown into pale shadows by what this new era can create. It will open up a closer and freer interchange between human minds, and it may well be hoped a kindlier interchange between human hearts and lives. Nor need its achievements stop here, but might proceed to greater things, of which these will only be the beginnings. The last line, of course, he's really hinting at the opening of the spiritual age, which is something greater than this. So all these are great things which we very frankly do not yet see, especially the last, if you know what I mean, given the perilous state of international relation, and in many societies, there have been a lot of disharmony. So he really is predicting a much better state than what we are in now. But what we are passing through now seems to be a necessary stage of disharmony that must be passed through in order to reach that greater coincidental oppositorium, that greater coincidence of opposites that will bring about that harmony that it's really talking about. Actually, this is really the last point I'm making. The other part is what we call the Atlantean arc. That part is something I do not have time to touch a lot on. Personally, like what Vladimir has introduced, my own spirituality is kind of a synthesis between Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga and Christianity. I mean, if people ask me whether I'm Christian, I'll say yes, definitely. But I'm also a follower of Sri Aurobindo. But there is something that I'm also have always been very interested in, and that is Atlantis. It took me many years before I fully understood why I should be in. I believe that Atlantis has something very much to do with mental subjectivism. I do not have the time to, this cannot be done in this seminar already. It's in my article. What I can do is only to briefly talk on the very, should we say, the big picture of what this is about and why Atlantis, which is supposedly just a myth, is actually going to be extremely important in this mental subjectivist age. So the first thing to establish is that there is going to be a new science, which already Sri Aurobindo talks about, where the subliminal being opens up collectively. And that, of course, is development of occultism. I think we will not read this part, but what it says here, which you can refer to, is that occult science is basically the science of the subliminal. It's the deployment of the knowledge of the subliminal world. So it's very obvious and natural that in the mental subjectivist communities, occult science will become the science. Physical science will be extended upwards as if the periodic table has grown many stories. Now we have a flat periodic table of a couple, 100 over elements. But occult science will be hundreds of elements on top, hundreds of stories on top of that. So it's a far richer and multifarious kind of technology and science can be developed. It is something that will supplant our physical science. So in short, really, we are talking about a curve that moves upward like that, as I mentioned earlier. We should not be looking at a transhumanist technological future. That's what people imagine will take place, but really that's not what Sri Aurobindo writes. And if you look at many science carefully, this is not what's going to happen. We're not going to be merged with the machine and be overrun with it. And of course, after this mental subjectivist age, we will close with, okay, maybe close is the wrong word in a progressive philosophy like Sri Aurobindo, but we will reach the spiritual age, which is really the real goal, right? And we reach there when in the mental subjectivist community, we no longer even say that mind, Manomaya Purusha, I mean the mental being is the ultimate reality. Instead, it is the spirit, however defined, the divine, however defined, that is the ultimate reality. When we reach that collective understanding, then the spiritual age will open up. So I only read the first part. The true secret can only be discovered if in the third stage, in the age of mental subjectivism, the idea becomes strong of the mind itself as no more than a secondary power of the spirit's working, and of the spirit as the great eternal, the original, and in spite of the many terms in which it is both expressed and hidden, the sole reality. So only when we reach that part, then the spiritual age will open up. So today's talk is really not really directly about the spiritual age. It's about the age we are in, which I think is the mental subjectivist age. And we are about to enter, in fact, into the cumulative stage. But that opens up the door to the full supramental manifestation, the spiritual age, which Sri Aurobindo's real work is about. So I just want to set that in context. Okay, and now I will just very briefly, this is a highly simplified argument that it's not, why Atlantis is sort of relevant. We can discuss it a bit more in the Q&A, but to really so-called stretch out the case will require a much longer time. Essentially, Sri Aurobindo did mention Atlantis a few times, not many. It's clearly not, like for instance, in this, one of his very early works, 1910, I think, he talks about this old, according to deemed traditions and memories of the old world of such a nature as the civilization of old Atlantis. which was when man was intellectually developed, mighty in scientific knowledge and the mastery of gross and subtle nature, using the elements as his servants and the world as his footstool, but undeveloped in heart and spirit, become only an inferior kind of asura, using the powers of demigod to satisfy the nature of an animal. In essence, Atlantis, according to the little few hints that Sri Aurobindo gave in his works, is a precocious civilization, a very old one, that went to the extreme of occult knowledge. That's his exact words in the Letters on Yoga, extreme of occult knowledge. And if Atlantean civilization attained an extremely developed and generalized inner knowledge, then actually it's actually quite equivalent to say it has actually attained to a degree the stage of mental subjectivism. And while actually Sri Aurobindo does not say so directly, a holistic consideration of his writings indicate that mental subjectivism is not a stage that humanity is attaining for the first time. It's actually a stage that humanity is recovering. I think that is the main point I'm trying to make. I believe that Atlantis actually represents a kind of abortive attempt to reach mental subjectivism, but it was too far ahead of its time, among other reasons, and the experiment did not end well. Regardless of that fact, it is actually, to me, very likely, as I say, I don't have time nor the ability at this point to prove the case, so to speak, or to give a richer context to what I'm saying, but I believe that what we so-called Atlantean culture artifacts and ideas are actually likely to resurface if they haven't already done so. As we re-enter into because this is how nature works, you see. Even if the previous experiment has been unsuccessful, Prakriti has this way of burying the old thing and digging it up again at the right time. Like how, one example is how the Renaissance in Europe, right, rediscovered Greco-Roman civilization, which collapsed about 1,000 years before. So Atlantis maybe collapsed, you follow Plato's dates, maybe 10,000 years before. And these things are likely to resurface, both the good and the bad. In fact, I would actually like to argue there's a strong logical case that Atlantean civilization may never have gone extinct. So whatever it might be, the past and present of Atlantis is actually likely to exercise a decisive influence as humanity recovers the stage of mental subjectivism. Before I move on to the question, I have believed that, again, this is a mix of good and bad news. Because the general myth of Atlantis in many traditions, whether you accept the Great Flood of the Bible or Plato's original idea or some of those Edgar Cayce things, or what Sri Aurobindo and the mother briefly hinted at, we all know that Atlantis ended with a bang. I mean, that's without a doubt. And generally speaking, it is believed that parts of Atlantis became corrupted at the end. There was some kind of civil war. So we ask, why is that even important? I think it's important because I already said, because I believe the good and the bad will recover itself. So it is quite possible that before we reach the spiritual age, before the forces of darkness are decisively defeated, there may well be something like a final battle or a final conflict. This final battle or final conflict need not be necessarily a military conflict. It could be a spiritual conflict, but I think there will be a final battle of some kind, where the forces of darkness must be defeated decisively. Of course, in 1956, they know the end is near, right? But the final battle has not come. Clearly, their influence is still strong in the world, although fading. I mean, I need not justify that obvious fact. I believe that old fall of Atlantis will have some implication for what is to come in the next few decades. Regardless, I believe that before we enter into the great harmony, we need to pass through some disharmony and maybe even this final conflict, maybe spiritual conflict, maybe military conflict. We hope it's spiritual. Then we'll reach the spiritual age. So I would say that ultimately, and very importantly, it is a hopeful note that we should end, because whatever may come in the decades ahead, some good, some bad, but definitely extraordinary, I think the end is clear. I mean, we already know and have faith that with the coming of the supramental, the world must and will be transformed. There is no if and buts about that. The question is how we get there, of course. And so, but I believe we will get there. And there are many extraordinary things that will happen in the meantime. both good and bad, however, according to our narrow little human minds. But we can look forward in the next few decades to great changes and to entering the age of mental subjectivism. So I end my, as what Vladimir has said, overly long talk here. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Jared. Wonderful. Very good, very thought-provoking presentation. Could you please stop sharing? Thank you. There are some questions here, many questions. I myself have questions, but I can discuss it with you separately. There is a question. I am a high school educator in Delhi, Jared. What would you suggest to us in the light of mental subjectivism as we are involved with the teaching learning process with the youth? Thank you. How to kind of approach this issue of mental subjectivism, how to see it, most probably how to deal with it in the educational environment, and especially with the youth, which is more subjective, I guess.
I think earlier, Jayanti, my friend, did a seminar with the group on education in the light of Sri Aurobindo. I think what we need to, my own view is that there is no formula, there is no fixed way, because every human, every child is plastic and at a different stage of development. And so I think we have to remain open to the possibilities before us. If we are met with a child who has, I will give a concrete example. For instance, I actually teach in high school myself. I mean, among the things I do. So I have met kids, for instance, who have developing subliminal abilities in lucid dreaming, for instance. I think most of us know what that is, right? That means they have the ability to be awake in their dreams. So if I meet kids like that who have things, I will actually tell them a bit about lucid dreaming and let them discover and let them develop in this area. But very obviously, not everyone can do lucid dreaming. So for other students, maybe you reach them on their level, provoke their thoughts that the future is changing, that the future is unexpected and extraordinary, that you need to look beyond money. And because really, it's actually very likely we'll see a semi-collapse of social structures as we go ahead in the future. With automation and all that, we will see a semi-collapse of social structure, the upheaval and contest between the East and West, the rise of China and all those things. The world is changing beneath our feet. So using this, we can provoke them to think deeper. So what really matters in life and things like that. So I would say really we have to be open to the unexpected and ask the mother for guidance in each case. So that's my answer.
Thank you. Thank you. So there is Marcella's writing. I congratulate your initiative. The conference is very interesting. The question is, my question is, what is the relationship between the technology in advance and manifestation of our inner mind? That basically is what you were trying to say. But what are the relations between these two? Well,
From my slides, I only brought out one relation, which is that it is a preparation, because naturally nature will work with the outer mind first. So as we enter into the mental subjectivist age, naturally we will push ahead with the fullest development of the external mind, and that includes technology, especially technology that augments our intelligent powers, i.e. computers, internet. It is a natural development. But that development cannot stop there, because we realize that with all this development, we grow a bit sick and tired of it with our smartphones and social media and Google, and realize all these things don't solve the fundamental problems. And because of that, we realize that maybe the outer mind is not sufficient. Then we start turning inwards. We start searching for more. So I would say one line, I mean, of course, there are a lot of other things which I can talk about, but one line of relation is that it exhausts us. It makes us realize that physical technology is not, or should I say the external mind, even when supremely augmented, is not sufficient. And that will cause us to search more deeply for something greater, a greater intelligence. Of course, the other one, which I very briefly mentioned, is that I believe that physical technology might provide some kind of aid to the eventual creation of, even to the whatever we are doing in the supramental age. Like for instance, chemistry cannot be completely irrelevant in the creation of supramental bodies. Of course, But these are highly speculative, so I really didn't want to bring those in. I would argue more for the first.
Thank you. It seems to me, says Karundas,
Mm.
that the widespread use of Zoom and video conferencing is a hidden gateway to the development of the inner powers of the mind. After
Very
all,
possibly.
we are collective, being trained to feel the personas of each other through a digital representation. Increasingly, we seem to be finding the reality of that inner connection, soul to soul, through these surface representations. It's quite an interesting.
Certainly. No, I fully and 100% agree. I've been doing some meditation with, I mean, all of us know that, during Darshan, the last 2 Darshan days, the Samadhi has been sort of broadcast through YouTube to the whole world, right? Yeah, I think that is another clear sign. Can we reach the presence of the mother through YouTube? That is an exercise. That is an exercise of our inner being, like it or not.
Right.
Definitely, as I say, this year has marked an acceleration. I think this is a very good point, not something I brought out. That in the end, the physical technology will augment the development of our inner self in many, many ways.
Right.
Even if it harms it in some way. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
There is also the question from one person: is this belief of the new era being very close by only a myth? Is this just a way to keep the believers optimistic that what we are chasing is just a small distance afar? Every time in Indian philosophy we find that it is said Satya Yuga is just around the corner, but never are we there, just chasing the distant star.
I said earlier, I have a Christian faith, right? I think we Christians are the best at this, right? I mean, even in the early years of the Christian era, people were expecting the end of the world already. That was 2,000 years ago, and yet the world hasn't ended. So I think that is definitely that especially when there is crisis and things, we do want to believe, right? And if we do want to believe, that of course distort our thinking, and therefore whatever we think should be less credible. So we need to give full validity to that point of view and that doubt. Having said that, I think if we judge by what Sri Aurobindo has said, and if you have some faith in what he writes, and if you match it pretty objectively to what has happened in the world for the last 70 years, I think it's hard to deny something quite fishy, in the good sense, is going on. Yeah, and of course, we further believe in the great acceleration in 1956. I think nothing of what I said is irrational. So while giving the full validity to what is that we should be doubtful sometimes, that we want to believe what we want to believe, I think even a cool, calm, objective consideration of the facts as they stand, given our own faith in the supramental manifestation of 56 and in what Sri Aurobindo has written, I believe it's clearly reasoned positioned. Yeah, I mean, without resorting to divine inspiration and all, I mean, it is, I think, a clearly reasoned position. Of course, we don't resort to divine inspiration, everything is possible. So,
right.
Yeah.
Right. There is also a request from someone to leave in the chat the reference to your book or to your article, sorry, on Atlantis and mental subjectivism. If you have it somewhere in the form that it can be downloaded, so you can leave the reference, or send to us. We send to every participant.
Yeah, sure. I will send you the latest. I'm amending one part. I mean, the old article I sent to you already, but now after I did the talk, I thought the new points came, and so I thought I will augment the article.
Right, wonderful. There is also a question from Josie Lammers. Thank you, Jared, for this profound talk. My question is what the influence will be of the Lemurian culture, pre-Atlantic, on the golden age that is spiritual culture in the future?
No, okay. I mean, I know about the Lemurians, but I do not know in the sense of knowing Atlantis, which is my real focus. All I know of the Lemurians is they are supposed to be, okay, I mean, there are various traditions again, right? One of which is that they are more like giant qigong masters. They have mastered the vital plane to a vast extent. There is one poem in Sri Aurobindo where he sort of take on a fictional persona and talk about how he mastered the old Lemurian yogas, which is sort of likened to some kind of pranayama. So qigong, in other words, the mastery of the life force. So if this kind of thing is true, then maybe the Lemurians represent a cycle where the life force, it is a true vital subjectivism. It might have been speculatively, it's completely speculatively, a true vital subjectivism. What Atlantis later represented, the fullest development of mental subjectivism. So that is my take. It does fit the evolutionary structure, and that particular, I think the poem was called Mahatma or something. It's one of Sri Aurobindo's collected poems, where he wrote from the perspective of Lemurians, Atlantean, and so on. Yeah. But this is purely speculative. I have never given much attention or thought to Lemuria. Almost all my attention has always been focused on Atlantis for many reasons.
Yeah. In Theosophy, the Blavatsky deals with Lemurian culture and Atlantis. But these are pre-cultures, so to say, prehistoric societies. And they remind me of the stages or the structures of consciousness in Gebser, in the magic structure and then mythical structure and finally mental structure of consciousness. Some kind of that development. Thank you.
Possibly.
Yeah, could be, but just again, it's a blind interpretation of.
Yes.
Yeah, there is one more question, and I will read to you. Do you find similarity between Lal Ded and Sri Aurobindo? That means Lal Ded is from Kashmiri Shaivism, and he's. There was a question about Laleshvari. Of Laleshvari, I do not know this work, and Sri Aurobindo as yogi. Do you find, what similarities do you find between Kashmiri Shaivism and Sri Aurobindo's integral philosophy? Well, what's just not now.
Yes. Well, that's my master's thesis at Oxford. It was on Abhinavagupta and Sri Aurobindo. Having said that, I do not want to claim to know more, because to really know a tradition, you have to practice it. So I would say that I have practiced Christian prayer, of course, and I practice integral yoga, and my knowledge of Atlantis is not merely theoretical. So, but the fact is, Kashmiri Shaivism, we believe in truth, right? So I just bluntly say, Kashmiri Shaivism, when I did it, I did not practice it. So to me, that was more intellectual exercise. So because of that, I told Vladimir that I actually didn't want to talk about Kashmiri Shaivism with Sri Aurobindo, because I believe you want to talk about something, you should have some authentic experience with it. So this question, while I can answer to some degree on the intellectual level, is really just on the intellectual level. And very briefly, I would say that Abhinavagupta's philosophy, which represents supposedly the highest point of Kashmiri Shaivism, is surprisingly similar to Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga. Yeah, they have this idea of what we can call an integral monism, where everything is one and yet differentiated. I'm putting it very, very, very simplistically. But a very interesting difference is that, very weirdly, from my intellectual knowledge, is that Abhinavagupta don't seem to have arrived at this idea of transforming the body and then the world. Despite the very interesting fact they have a great similarity of philosophy, this idea of bringing down the spirit in some sense and transforming the body and the whole world is really quite unique to Sri Aurobindo. And the interesting thing is really, why is it that they started with such similar metaphysics and they ended with such different securology, that means different way of viewing, so to speak, salvation. This is a loaded word, but it's a technical term. But so that's all I can say. I mean, this is intellectually. But you see, my understanding of Kashmiri Shaivism might well be distorted by the fact I never practiced it. So this is just my observation.
Thank you.
But we shouldn't give too much credence. Yeah, which is why I didn't want to
Well,
talk about it.
yes, those who
Yes.
studied yes, Kashmiri Abhinava
Mm,
Gupta, they know that
mm,
similarity is quite profound. But
yes.
truly speaking, what you say is absolutely true. It's
Mm,
surprising that he is not arriving at this necessity of transformation of life. Or maybe it is
mm.
implied, but it is not explicitly pointed out or put as an aim of life. Maybe it's
So the
implied.
legend So the legend is that Abhinav Gupta with his disciples at the end of his life went to a cave and sort of disappeared, you see. So we do know that disappearing from a cave is not the end goal of integral yoga, however important it may be as a stage towards the final consummation. I mean, having said all that, I mean, we don't want to get into a debate or which spiritual path is greater or worse. I mean, the point is that everything moves like a stage, right? Like what we just said, this building up of the planetary infrastructure of AI and computers and all that, it's an inferior thing. Of course, it's inferior compared to what is to come. But does it mean it's useless? It does not mean it's useless. In fact, it's a very
Absolutely.
great thing in itself. We need to see it for what it is. So Atlantis rose and fell. I am of the belief Atlantis still exists, actually. I don't have time to justify it, but the fact is it fell in some sense. Does it mean Atlantis was worthless and useless? Clearly not, because it's likely that whatever it did will be dredged up again as we re-enter that stage. So everything, nature weighs nothing. I mean, that's probably how it works. Yeah.
Right, right. Thank
Mm.
you. Thank you. Of course, there is much more in Kashmiri Shaivism
Mm.
than we just mentioned here. There is no explicitly shown the aim
Mm.
for transformation of all life, society, and so on, as Sri Aurobindo did. Yes, but there is transformation is taking place. Definitely, there is a remark made here by some attendees. So
Mm.
I agree. So we cannot really touch deeply this subject now, especially if
Mm.
when our time is over. So I will I will have to stop now. And I thank you very much. There is a great feedback from many people for this clarity in the mind and making it more realistic, that it is not
Mm.
just somewhere, imagination or some kind of wish or some myth. It is already
Mm.
happening, myth in the making.
Live in the making. I would
Right.
say, as a last word, that we should, I mean, we really need to have hope, especially when everything seems to be against us. Uh, my own view, as I said, is that actually, you may say that I believe in things that I want to believe in, but actually, I said quite clearly in the talk, what is coming in the next few decades is not paradise. What is coming in the next few decades is a mix of light and darkness, possibly even a final battle before we reach the spiritual age. In other words, we are looking for times which will be challenging, where we need to solve problems, and which is why we need to be warriors for the future, like what the mother has to say. We have to have this faith that no matter what is thrown at us, the future is assured,
Mhm.
and we have the grace and the supramental descent behind to make it through to that final transformation. But I'm not saying it's a Pollyanna thing. There will be many obstacles, many
Mhm.
challenges to be surmounted.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Thank you, Jared. It was wonderful to
yeah.
be with you, and I will send you the feedback and the
Mm,
questions. Please leave your feedback and questions in the form which we supply after this webinar. And
mm,
wish to meet with you again and to discuss again in depth the
in depth.
futuristic vision of our
Mm.
life. Thank you, Jared. All the best.
Thank you, thank you.
Namaste.
Thanks, Vladimir. Thanks.
Thank
Namo.
you. Thank
No
you,
problem.
Jared,
Thank you
very
so much.
much.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you. I'll
Namaste.
leave.